Be groovy. Comment, like, share, subscribe.
The G.I. Joe franchise, initially launched by the American toy company Hasbro in 1964, underwent a series of significant transformations in the 1970s that would set the stage for its future success. Initially modeled as a line of 12-inch military action figures, G.I. Joe began to diversify and adapt during this decade to meet changing consumer interests and economic pressures. This era is now all but forgotten. Let's take a trip back to the fabulous 1970s and explore a neglected legacy in the history of G.I. Joe. Community Posts is now open. Be sure to hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss out on exclusive bonus content.
Initiate sequence. Retrotron Entertainment presents.
That's 70s Nerd. The beginning of the 1970s saw Hasbro introducing a pivotal innovation that would spawn 1,000 references, jokes, and memes for decades to come. The Kung Fu Grip. Released in 1974, this feature allowed G.I. Joe figures to grip objects more firmly, enhancing their play value. This reflected a broader trend in toy manufacturing towards greater realism and interactivity. Around the same time, possibly due to growing anti-war sentiment worldwide, Hasbro began to move away from the line's military-centric focus. In 1970, the Adventurer series was introduced. These figures were still recognizably G.I. Joe, but they took on a broader set of roles and environments. The move away from a purely military narrative took a more structured form with the introduction of the Adventure Team in 1970. Adventure Team members came equipped for different kinds of missions: jungle safaris, deep-sea dives, mountain rescues, reflecting a broader view of what made an appealing action narrative in the 1970s. Many figures in this line included lifelike features such as beards and more intricate accessories, enhancing the realism and imaginative projection. Accompanying vehicles and playsets, such as the Mobile Support Vehicle and the Headquarters Command Center, added appeal to the adventure theme. This is the G.I. Joe I grew up with and still remember best. Let's take a closer look at the Adventure Team. Joe Colton, the fearless leader. At the heart of the Adventure Team is none other than Joe Colton, the original G.I. Joe. With his rugged looks and unwavering bravery, Colton serves as the quintessential American hero. As a decorated war veteran, his expertise in strategy and combat tactics was unparalleled. Whether leading missions deep into the jungle or navigating treacherous terrain, Colton's charisma and leadership qualities inspired the Adventure Team to be all they could be. Adventure Team Commander Mike Power. One of the most unique members of the Adventure Team was Mike Power, better known as Atomic Man. After a near-fatal accident, Power's body was rebuilt with bionic limbs and an atomic core, granting him superhuman strength and abilities. His courage and resilience in the face of adversity make him an essential asset in tackling the most dangerous adventures. Action Pilot Ace. Taking to the skies with unmatched finesse, Ace is the Adventure Team's resident pilot. With his Top Gun-worthy skills, Ace navigates the most challenging airspace and pulls off daring aerial maneuvers. His cool demeanor under pressure and undeniable passion for flying make him an irreplaceable member of the team. When the mission requires underwater expertise, Frogman answers the call. Equipped with his diving suit and array of aquatic gear, he fearlessly explores the ocean depths, uncovering hidden mysteries and facing aquatic dangers head-on. His resourcefulness and deep knowledge of aquatic environments make him an invaluable asset. Land Adventurer Stalker. Stalker, also known as the Land Adventurer, is a skilled tracker and survivalist. With his keen instincts and mastery of wilderness survival, he can traverse any landscape with ease. Whether deep in the forest or trekking through desolate terrains, Stalker's environmental expertise and experience give the team an edge in any situation. By the mid-1970s, Hasbro also began dabbling in licensed properties and co-branding efforts. The line of figures known as Super Joe was introduced in 1977, taking advantage of the science fiction and superhero craze of that era. Though not as successful as the original line, these endeavors displayed Hasbro's willingness to keep their brand up to date with current trends. The Super Joe Adventure Team was introduced in 1977 as an offshoot of the original G.I. Joe Adventure Team line. The Super Joe figures were notably smaller than their 12-inch Adventure Team predecessors, measuring around 8 inches tall. This smaller scale was partly an attempt to cut production costs during a time of economic uncertainty and increasing material prices. The figures in the Super Joe line differed significantly from the traditional G.I. Joe figures. The line initially had 3 characters: Super Joe Commander, dressed in a space-like suit and adorned with a unique shield. Super Joe Commander was the leader of the Super Joe Adventure Team. Super Joe Adventure Team Light. This figure was designed to represent the forces of good and came with an illuminated chest figure. Super Joe Adventure Team Dark. This figure was conceived as a dark counterpart to the Adventure Team Light, also featuring an illuminated chest but meant to signify the forces of evil. Later, 2 more figures were introduced. Gore, a heroic figure with a beastly appearance, representing a creature from another world. Terron, a villainous creature figure, designed as a monstrous opponent for Super Joe and his team. The Super Joe line also included playsets and vehicles that matched the science fiction theme. Super Joe Rocket Command Center. This was an elaborate playset that served as the base for the Super Joe figures, complete with features like a launch pad and mission control center. Super Joe Commander's Space Capsule, a smaller vehicle designed to fit with the space-themed aspect of the Super Joe line. One of the most striking features of the Super Joe figures was the use of infralight technology. This feature allowed parts of the figures, usually the chest area, to glow in the dark when exposed to specific light sources, enhancing the sci-fi experience and making these toys unique in the market. The Super Joe line was a bold experiment, but it didn't achieve the same level of success as the original G.I. Joe Adventure Team. Several factors contributed to this, including strong competition from other toy lines that were tapping into similar trends, such as Kenner's Star Wars figures and Mego's various licensed products. The Super Joe Adventure Team was eventually discontinued in 1978, lasting only for a short period of about 2 years. The late 1970s also saw economic pressures affecting the G.I. Joe line. The oil crisis led to increased costs for plastic, which in turn made the production of 12-inch figures less economically viable. In response to this, Hasbro introduced smaller vehicles and playsets, reducing the scale but not the adventure. While the figures remained 12 inches throughout the 1970s, the economic pressure foreshadowed the shift towards the 3.75-inch figures that would define the brand in the 1980s. Technological developments also played a part in the evolution of the G.I. Joe line during the 1970s. The Talking Adventure Team Commander, for instance, used a pull string mechanism to speak several different phrases, representing one of the earliest attempts to incorporate electronic elements into action figures. Additionally, figures began to feature more points of articulation, enhancing their posability and overall play value. Towards the end of the 1970s, sales began to wane. The combination of economic pressures and changing consumer preferences meant that the Adventure Team and other G.I. Joe offerings from this decade were eventually discontinued. However, it is worth noting that the foundational ideas laid down during this decade, adventurous narratives, expanded themes, and increased interactivity, would serve as the blueprint for the franchise's relaunch in the coming decade. Though the end of the decade saw a dip in popularity, the changes implemented during these years would lay the groundwork for G.I. Joe's future transformations and successes. Despite its short-lived nature, the Super Joe Adventure Team was a notable attempt by Hasbro to diversify the G.I. Joe brand and adapt to changing consumer tastes. While it may not have enjoyed the longevity and widespread appeal of the other G.I. Joe lines, Super Joe remains an interesting chapter in the history of this iconic franchise.